Edmund Fihoko here from the Kingdom of Otahu with the rest of the Tongan population here. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in from wherever you are. Community groups, non-profit organizations, universities, tertiaries, schools. Even if you're just tuning in from your home, as you just are supposed to, if you're in Tāmaki Makaurau, good morning and welcome to our webinar Talanoa for this morning. We have a special guest for today, Asetoa Sam Pilisi, from the islands of Niue and Samoa, and who will be sharing his research and also inspiring some of the work that he's done with our Pacific students, families and communities over the years. Again, if you're tuning in, please feel free to drop down some comments, questions on the Q&A on our Zoom. And if you have any coffee, please feel free to send them over via Uber Eats to Otahu as well. Let's begin. And at this time, I'd like to thank you, Sam, for taking the time. I know that you're a very busy man, and if it wasn't for COVID-19 lockdown level 3, you'll probably be traveling around Auckland inspiring our students. But at this time, it's a blessing to have you here on Community Research Webinar to share and disseminate some of your research and your motivations that has inspired our Pacific students in the tertiary sector. I'll get you to kind of introduce yourself. If you can share some of your blessings with us, name, village, your background as well, and then we'll carry on with Aotearoa. Malo.
Malo, whakalawhale ia tukim tolosi. Thank you, Dr. Edmund Fihoko, for the invite. It's definitely a blessing and a privilege to share space digitally, as you've already mentioned in Tāmaki Makaurau, we're on level 3. So nonetheless, still able to connect and share and receive experiences and just uplift each other. As mentioned previously, my name is Asetoa Sam Pilisi, New Zealand born Samoan Niuean, with our links to the villages of Soalaupule and Savai, and also Paloli, Vailo Paloli and Savai, which is in Samoa. And my mum hails from the island of Niue, which I have links back to Awasele and Alofi North. But myself, I'm definitely a citizen of Central Auckland, born and raised in the first kingdom of our Pacific migrants, which was Ponsonby and Greyland. We've since invited the rest of the world to come in and share our streets, and our uncles and aunties and grandparents have, many of us have obviously moved into other parts of Auckland, but it's nice to see that we stay resident, so to speak, of Central Auckland via our churches, our sports clubs and our schools. So I'm the oldest of 5 boys. My mum kept praying for a daughter, and they kept trying. Then after 5, that was enough. I've been working in tertiary education for over 10 years, mainly working with Pacific students, both at university, but also in high schools, and just incredibly blessed to do so, and then share time and space in our current webinar. Malo.
Thank you, Sam, and for sharing your background and informing us that the original capital was Greyland Ponsonby, and where there's more Tongans there than the rest of the Pacific communities. For those who are tuning in, welcome again to our Community Research Webinar with our guest speaker, Sam Pilisi. For those who may have any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them on the Q&A or the chat box below on your Zoom account, from wherever you're tuning in from. I am hoping, if you're tuning in from Auckland, that you're staying safe and being kind and staying home, or if you're in the car because there's no other space in your household that you can have quiet meetings, then please feel free to drop some comments below. Sam, just moving right along, education has played a big part in your life, and if you can share with us some of your educational journey from wherever it started from, right up to this very moment. Yeah, so and also just if you can briefly mention those key people who have influenced you to become the person that you are today.
Malo. I grew up in central Auckland, so I went to kindy, primary, and also high school. I went to Mount Albert Grammar when it was all boys, the Kingdom of the Blue Lion. Lots of changes in that school now, but I still have connections back there. And following high school, it was always the plan to go to university. I had my mum's siblings, some of my mum's siblings go to university, and sort of that was shown as the route. You finish school, go to university, work hard, and set yourself up for the future. Perhaps like many of our young people, I've seen in the last 10 years and continue to see is I don't really have a set plan on what I wanted to study. However, uni was the pathway to go. I did see my auntie complete a law degree during my time when I was at high school. So you sort of those line of sight sort of careers or study professions, and I arrived to uni taking up social sciences, which I just thought was social studies. But to my surprise, it was close but sort of far away from that. And what I am fortunate that whilst I didn't have the most planning under my belt towards what I studied, I grew to love social sciences and understand about society, understand about different cultures and how we interact. And so following that, I entered into the space of working with young people and have juggled sort of studied on the side from there. I was always interested in Pacific cultures, both my Niuean culture and Samoan culture, but also just broadly right across the Pacific. So I did some postgraduate study up at the University of Auckland, I think about 10 years ago. And then about 5 years ago, I undertook some study at AUT, which is my current workplace. Entered into the Master of Educational Leadership as advised from my boss. Didn't sound too exciting at the time. Sounded like it was for leaders and perhaps for people that are aspiring to be principals or middle management, which I didn't see myself as. Nonetheless, did quite a few papers, and then towards the back end, completed a dissertation around service, which I really enjoyed. Some key people around, I guess my educational journey was always my mum and my parents, my grandparents, who I spent a good chunk of my childhood with. Always pushed to work hard, to do your best. And I was fortunate enough to do well in school when I put some effort in. And times when I sort of slacked off, it was reflected in my grades, and then had to learn to navigate that and be resilient and keep pushing ahead for whatever the goals that were in front of me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing a very humbling journey within the field of education. And I know that before we talk about some of your research findings within your dissertation that you carried out, I know that you have also that you're very influential in the field of education, particularly in the tertiary space and some of the work that you do. Can you share some of your work journey in education, particularly the work that you've done in Australia? We may have some viewers tuning in from Australia, from wherever they are. I'm hoping it's Victoria because they're also on lockdown as well. So again, for those who are tuning in, please feel free to sit back, relax, enjoy your coffee, or we would have had some kava here, but unfortunately, Jacinda has put us into level 3, which is a good move to ensure that we stamp out COVID-19. Yeah, so Sam, going back, Sam, if you can share some of your work journey, particularly in the education space as well.
Malo, if I perhaps talk to the genesis of my work in education, I I reference a mentoring program that is run out of the or a mentoring camp, so to speak, out of the University of Auckland, which I think I met you there, Edmund, as well, many years ago, wearing your singlet around in the cold winter, flexing. But the camp was called Dream Whanotanga, or Dream Whano as it's commonly known. And I think 2006 was my first time there as a mentor. I perhaps didn't have the biggest expectations of what it was going to be, other than, camp, and you're gonna play some games, maybe some competition, and just have some fun. But personally, it changed the direction of where I was wanting to go and what I wanted to do. I had so much fun, but also I found purpose during that camp. Um, just to give some quick context, there's about 120 plus Pacific students that go on camp for a week, usually year 12, 16, 17 years old. And mentors are split up to take a group. So I had a female mentor partner, and we had about, I think, 12 or 13 students, and they were our kids, so to speak, for the week. And I loved it. I loved the interaction. I loved, sewing into young people. And that week, whatever that was, I just went, oh, I want this to be me. I want to serve or exist or operate in this space. And so upon leaving uni, because that was towards the end of my uni studies, I became a youth worker at a private training education provider out in West Auckland. And I took everything that I enjoyed from Dream Funnel and applied that to our work in helping young people at the time who were disengaged with mainstream education. But nonetheless, still had a basic goal to make their mum and dad proud. And exiting out of mainstream sort of came with its stigma and stuff like that. So I found joy in working in that space for a couple of years. And then I worked into a wider tertiary space and going into high schools. And that was awesome because we got to go visit schools right across Auckland, right across New Zealand, and so into young people the idea of tertiary education, work hard in school, put goals ahead, and enter into tertiary education, one, to broaden our horizons, to learn new knowledge, but also to equip ourselves with skills so that we can go back into the workforce, into the community, and support ourselves and our families. And since that, I've done that at a training provider in Auckland, and immediately after that, I went to Australia, which was the same but then different, working with Māori and Pacific students in Western Sydney, which has the largest amount of Māori and Pacific people in Australia. And so that was incredibly humbling, and I met so many Māori and Pacific families who had come from New Zealand as well and moved to Australia for a variety of reasons, but in essence was obviously to search for a better life and to have better opportunities. And so working there, I learned so many things around higher education is on offer there, but pay rates for low to medium skilled jobs are bloody awesome. And lots of our people are happy, so to speak, or are afforded the chance just to go into these entry level jobs and make a killing. And in one sense, that made preaching, if we want to call it that, or encouraging our people to look at qualifications, a bit of an uphill battle. And so I enjoyed my time there, the few years that I was in Western Sydney. And then after that, I returned back to Auckland and have been at AUT for over 5 years now, and continuing the same work with many other colleagues that work in various providers to encourage our Pasifika youth in particular to look towards the future. Education is incredibly empowering, and it can democratize, so to speak, the opportunities ahead. And it doesn't matter in terms of skin color or area code that you live in. Qualifications is equipped with you for life, and it can open up so many doors. So that's been my journey, so to speak, with working within education. And I've been thoroughly blessed to meet so many awesome young people and the families that are attached to these young people. Malo.
Oh, thank you, Seb. And if anything, I've learned a new word this morning, which is democratize. And I had no idea, let alone how to spell that word. So
I
thank
looked it
you.
up on Google before I came here.
And I can definitely vouch on the camp that you have mentioned, which has inspired my educational journey, which almost kicked off my my passion for education during Whanatanga. And the leaders like yourself and some very inspiring keynote speakers at the time, the likes of Councillor Efeso Collins and also Ronji Tanielu, had pretty much laid the foundation for me to pursue education as a pathway to one day make that difference. So the work that you're doing is amazing for our Pacific families and communities, and I do hope that you continue doing that work in inspiring our students as well.
Um,
Now, negotiating service within areas of responsibilities, experiences of New Zealand-born Pacific tertiary students. Um, can you share the motivation behind carrying out this amazing piece of research that you did for your Masters of Educational Leadership?
Thank you. I think in part, these are parts of my working journey, my studying journey, and also perhaps lots of the young people that I interacted with that formed the genesis for the motivation for this study. And what I guess I can speak to or attest to is that service is huge in our communities. The heart to serve and do things for others and to give and want to share within a wider collective is it's embedded in our DNA, if we want to call it that, and we see it everywhere. We see it in our homes, we see it in our churches, we see it in our communities. And if I reference in particular my time at Western Sydney, all the Pacific Uni students there were incredibly motivated to give back to their communities. If we want to make some parallels, Western Sydney is perhaps Sydney or even Australia's version of South Auckland, but is resident to 2.5 million people. So it's a much larger community with lots of different ethnic groups. And I found many of the Pacific University students came to uni to give back to their families and wanted to, work hard and demonstrate back to their families that the opportunities afforded to them, that they were aware of it, and they wanted to make the most of university study, but also they wanted to work hard and go back into their communities and show that Western Sydney can have doctors, Western Sydney can have lawyers, and so forth. And so out of that became the motivation to go, well, service and how we look at the world and how we see our journey I've found is intertwined by this desire and heart to serve others. And so our minds, our hearts, and our actions follow under this ethos of serving others. And so that was the desire. I wanted to capture stories around that. And so I was very grateful to undertake the study and then collect stories of New Zealand-born Pacific Uni students.
Sorry, technical issue here with the microphone. Thought I had a flash one. Anyways, now that you have talked, we've got a question here from Rob, but before I ask the question from Rob, can you share some of the methodology that you carried out for your study?
So I took a qualitative approach and decided to do talanoa interviews, and basically wanted to the stories and experiences of these young people to drive the research. And so basically I was just a fly on the wall and asked a few questions and just asked them to share what their world looks like through a service lens.
Okay. Again, if it's not a mic, it's the internet here in Otahu, and this is the problem here of carrying out Zoom meetings. Anything could happen really. We've got a question here from Rob, where he states that he mentions you being shown education as the pathway by your family, and that you enjoy education as well. Can you credit the joy for education to anybody or anything you experienced in your learning? Before, and so that's one question, and the other question is, what tips can you provide in terms of how we can make young people, young Pacific students, enjoy education? So yeah, how do we make the education space a joyful space in order for our Pacific students to enjoy learning?
Rob, we got to ask hard questions for. I think personal journey and what I found joy was, or what I guess people around me that motivated me. I think my mum was a solo mum for a while until she remarried, and and seeing the sacrifices that our mother made for me and my two brothers at the time. So there was three of us for a bit. And my mum didn't, do too well through school, but she mentioned just, don't follow my footsteps, sons. Work hard, do your best, and if you can go to uni, then go to uni. And so for me personally, seeing the sacrifices and hearing the words of my mum to not follow after her footsteps was the motivation I needed to do my best. That wasn't a sustained effort all the time. There were definitely times where I just fell off or just didn't want to or was bored, but that was my reference point, was to go back to that. In terms of making education enjoyable for Pacific students, for me, I did okay in high school and just did the bare minimum to sort of get out with university entrance. But when I got to uni, I found the joy of being able to apply my assignments, my presentations, group work, using whatever theories and other things that were there, which were often Western theories, but find ways to include and interweave Pacific or Maori stories in there, which often reflected my own personal experiences or people that I knew around me. So I found joy in that, which is, I guess, the privilege or what you have when you get to uni. Options open up. You can start to focus on areas that you are interested in more, as opposed to being when you're in compulsory education in high school in particular. Like, there's just subjects you have to take and you have to, and I guess it's sort of pleasing to hear the introduction or the widening of New Zealand history and Māori narratives in that, and contextualizing who we are as people here in New Zealand. And for me, I hope that will be a little bit more of a carrot for young people to know history, as opposed to learning about history in Europe or in Asia, or countries that are, 500 years ago, that perhaps has no, direct relevance to who we are as an emerging nation here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thank you, and I do hope that has answered your question, Rob. And if you want further information, we'll put up a link of Sam's research thesis online, which you can read during while you're on lockdown as well. For those who have just tuned in, welcome to Community Research Talanoa webinar for this morning. We have our guest speaker here, Asetoa Sam Pilisi from AUT University, who's sharing some of his research findings regarding a recent Masters of Educational Leadership research that he's done, which entitles Negotiating Service Within Areas of Responsibilities, Experiences of New Zealand-born Pacific tertiary students. Now, you mentioned the word service, and before I ask Nina Tu'i's question, service has a lot of definitions and meanings, and particularly across many Pacific cultures. The word tautua is now a popular word within a lot of spaces. How would you, what is your definition of tautua? And if we can compare it to some of the findings that you found, and whether there were any key differences or similarities within your own personal definition of tautua compared to the students that you talk to.
Malo. In the research on in the Talanoa interviews, I didn't define service, but I included the word service in the questions. And what had come out of that was a variety of, I guess, similar words to service. And I guess I'll just read them out. I made some notes earlier. So again, I didn't define what I felt service was, but left it up to the young people and the participants to articulate what they understood and perceived service to be. So to them, it meant like serving others. It meant giving to others. It also meant like doing things for others. And one of the key ones was around putting others first rather than yourself. They saw service as that. And it was this idea and the spirit of being generous with your time, your heart, mind, and your resources, which quick ones were always around money or food. You were, generous with that. You shared it out, and this idea of hospitality. And so I think, according to the young people, which reflects some of how I see things, is service is not necessarily just actions. Service is a worldview, it's a lifestyle, and it's a lens on how we look at things, and then how we, obviously service can be defined as actions, but I think it's much broader than that, which is also reflected in how the young people talked about service and didn't just see it as mere actions of dropping grandma off to the doctors, or putting money in an envelope for this. It was much more than that. It came from the heart and from the mind and how we see the world, and then that obviously influenced how and why we do things.
Awesome. We got a question here from Nina Tui, which states, how can we support and nurture the spirit of service within our young people while also ensuring that their time is valued and recognized appropriately?
I think if I perhaps look at two strands, or if I start off first by cultural service, all the young people shared that obviously there are elements of responsibilities and obligations that are that exist and are expected of them within cultural frameworks. And that was all defined by either being the elder sibling or being a daughter as opposed to a son, and a variety of different roles that they have. I think it's important to, where possible, and I guess this is within the family context or even community church context, is to unpack these meanings behind why cultural service responsibilities are important, and give young people the knowledge and the tools to understand that. Because what had come out through the interviews was that young people appreciated being explained the significance and the meanings behind this, and perhaps, which is the key word, is relationships, and how relationships are important. Because sometimes living here in New Zealand, or if we live outside of our Pacific homelands, we often don't meet the 500 aunties and uncles that you have just on your mum's side, let alone your dad's side. And so I think it's important to unpack that. But also the key thing that came out was that young people shared this idea that they go between two worlds. And so, they acknowledge that Pacific values are important, and which in part is this idea of service. They acknowledge that by serving and giving to others and not thinking about yourself, that's not selfish. And they don't want to be selfish, because you acknowledge that other people have done things for you. So in part, you do things for others. But then in the same vein, some of the young people talked about, so then I said, oh, if you don't serve, does that mean you're being selfish? And then they're like, well, sometimes you can't always give. Yeah, maybe that's not selfish if you need a break or if you need a rest. And so they sort of go between these two worlds and paradigms, where it's serve at all costs, or this idea that, you can serve and give, but you need to stay within some means, or you need to have a break from time to time. And so I think as parents, we need to acknowledge, or even as adults, we need to acknowledge that for our young people here in New Zealand, this isn't the same as the Pacific or our villages, where it's our bread and butter. And our young people need to be supported in fulfilling these responsibilities, but also understand that this is a very different world here in New Zealand. I forgot the last part of the question.
Don't worry about it. You have answered it, and you've also kind of touched and also answered the second part of the question, which was how can we keep that spirit of service alive in a consumerist society? And the key word that you mentioned is open communication, and allowing for parents to be open and share and unpack some of these cultural responsibilities that our young people will face today. We've got a question here from P. Mata. Does your research identify any resentment or negative feelings from our young Pacific people around cultural responsibility, and if so, any reasons why?
If I go one step prior to answering this question, is that lots of research in the 90s and 2000s to date looks at New Zealand-born Pacific youth in crisis with cultural responsibilities and leaving cultural spaces, be it the church, like our Pacific language churches and so forth. I purposely interviewed Pacific young people that have remained in Pacific churches, that have remained in terms of serving their families and their communities, that I knew that were active. And so when I come back to this question, all the young people did identify that serving is empowering and purposeful to them. However, it's not straightforward. And they did identify that, so if I go to the sort of gender split, is that all the girls identified that there's more responsibilities given to them and greater expectations for them to carry out various tasks that are not expected of their brothers. The brothers came to the table and also shared that they see that their sisters are expected far more duties and cultural responsibilities as opposed to them. Now, when we look at, I guess, this idea of resentment, I didn't see that in any of the participants that I interviewed, but they did acknowledge that it can be incredibly difficult. Serving also comes with attached relationships that also can be political. Be it just between different families, different villages, different churches, and it can be sometimes tricky to navigate that. Why did you serve or give your time or your resources to these guys and not to these guys? But what they found was that through those challenges, you grow a wide base of cultural knowledge. You understand various relationships and perhaps understand in the past and perhaps where things have broken down, and then in your own way try to mitigate that as a young person. And if we acknowledge that often our young people are just I don't merely say puppets, but we are actors, or we navigate spaces based on the orders or leadership of others. And so we are aware, and we understand what this all looks like. And then I guess as we start to transition into spheres or roles of leadership, we take into account what we've seen over the years, and perhaps we try and work that space, if I call it work, perhaps a little bit better, understanding what we've seen over the years.
Awesome. Again, welcome everybody. For those who are tuning in to our community research webinar, we have our guest speaker here, Asetoa Pilisi, who's sharing his experiences and knowledge regarding a recent study he's carried out with our New Zealand-born Pacific tertiary students and their understanding of service. And thank you again for those who are tuning in with their cup of coffee and staying safe and staying home as a result of the recent small outbreak of COVID-19. We have a question here from Michelle, and talofa Michelle from Otipoti from Dunedin, who is currently working at Otago Polytech and teaches on the health bridging program. Her question is, do you have any suggestions about how we can support students who won't pass their studies and find it very difficult to balance workload, cultural responsibilities, and education responsibilities, and how we can support these students to successfully complete their qualifications? So this question is kind of related to your research, but also some of the work that you're doing and informing students about some of the challenges they will face at university, where there's a big jump from secondary school right to the university lecture theatre.
Cool. Thanks for that question, Michelle. Some of the challenges that exist for these young people is this idea that responsibilities are not all equal. And whilst the responsibility to go to university is important, and to do your best at uni and apply yourself to your readings, going to class, and obviously doing your best in exams or big assignments, many of the young people express this desire that the greatest importance in life is family over everything. And if family, the call goes out, so to speak, that your time and your energy needs to be elsewhere, be it funerals or other things like dropping off your grandma to various things. Many of the young people just pretty much blatantly said that that's more important than school. And they will do that, they will fit that in at another time. I think the challenge though, however, is that many of the young people express this desire to have a good balance, and to have a balance with home life and fulfill responsibilities which they feel an obligation to do so, but also feel on their heart that when they fulfill these responsibilities, there is harmony and there's satisfaction personally, but also collectively. But then when asked to, how do you take steps to balance that, it's a bit of a tricky one. None of the young people that I interviewed could articulate what balance looks like, what self-care and protecting well-being looks like. So I think there's some of the onus goes on adults of influence, be it parents, be it educators, to help create space for young people to explore and maybe test the boundaries of where the load is too heavy. And then start to pull back and go, okay, how do we start to clear some of these responsibilities? And if it's not for like a forever, how do we do things in periods where perhaps the semester's a busy time, and this is for the next few weeks I just need to take myself off these XYZ responsibilities, because I think that's sometimes a bit of a burden that young people feel like they're not doing their part, and so that's why they keep these things all on the load. And so when I think you only know what you know, and if young people are perhaps aren't given the tools or time to flesh out what this all looks like, and perhaps make a few mistakes along the way, and then I guess from there form some better practice around studying and doing your best in study, but also I guess staying connected to these responsibilities that are dear to our heart.
Awesome. We got a question here from Lani, and if, for those who are tuning in, please keep your comments coming in, your questions, and if they're very hard, please feel free to email it to yourself. We got a question here from Lani, whether you can comment on the current issue of Pacific High School students who arrive at a crossroads where they would commit to financially upholding and contributing to their households through work, and which I think we saw this during COVID-19, where a lot of particularly our Pacific students who wouldn't return back to school as a result of trying to support families at home and during challenging times. If you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky situation and can be obviously heartbreaking in some ways, looking at young people cutting education short to play their part within their household. But I guess if you understand the way we look at service, then I guess it's a no-brainer for saying some young people, when they see their parents go through some hardship, sometimes parents would even go out of their way to say, no, you carry on with school. But when we're conditioned to see that everyone has a part to play in the house or in the wider village setting, you don't want to be that person that's not contributing. And if you can be directly contributing via a wage, even if it's at minimum wage, then I think our heart's desire will drive us to leave school and do our part within the matrix of the collective. And so I guess as a short comment to wrap that up, I think obviously that's a short-term fix to what are immediate needs, and I get that bills need to be paid and people need to be fed and other expenses. But I guess from an educational or lifelong learning point of view is that there will always be bills, and if we can consider that, if we rework some of the things that we need to do and we take on some sacrifices, then our young people can stay involved and engaged in education and look for perhaps higher paying income, which is perhaps not a now or next week, but in a few years' time. Then the rewards come a bit later on. But I guess each to their own and their individual households in terms of what is deemed urgent and necessary, and young people making decisions on what they feel is the right thing to do.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We've got a question here from an ex-colleague of ours, Sia, from the Garden City of Christchurch, who's currently enjoying level 2 at the moment. So he's got a question for you, Sam, which is, did your research show any obvious trends as to what are the biggest issues young Pacific people are facing today? And not just in tertiary, but just getting through compulsory education in general.
One of the things I picked up on was that all the young people expressed that this notion of balance, balancing your responsibilities, or having, I guess, managing self-care. They all said, yeah, no, that's cool. Little bit of a smile and all this sort of stuff, and talked about it as this lofty idea. And then when asked to sort of unpack, what does self-care look like to you, or what have you observed around you in terms of balancing service with this need to perhaps rest, or to not always give? How do you sort of balance the give and sort of hold back? None of them could articulate anything around that. And I guess what that shows is that there's obviously goodness in this if we view it that way, that often our parents just know just to give. And that's what our young people see, is just give. And if there's nothing to give, then we'll reach further and we'll give into our time, we'll give into our energy, we'll give of our money, food, so forth. But I guess the challenge is that the young people did acknowledge that that's not necessarily sustainable. And so I think there's a gap there in trying to understand how do we grow self-care principles. And I think if I sort of colloquially just frame this idea that, having a break, we laugh at it. In the Pacific, young people, it's sort of this idea that it's this Palangi concept of having a break, doing yoga, having a cup of tea, resting while everyone else is doing stuff and everyone else is giving, because we are taught to serve and give and continually do so. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, is to, I guess, grapple with this idea that we can't go full engines blasting 24/7, and the young people identify that, but don't necessarily have the tools or the examples around them to see what balance looks like, and then obviously have that inform their own practice in juggling their responsibilities at home and church, but also their responsibilities to school. And then the last thing is obviously this responsibility to self, and this responsibility to look after themselves, because somewhere in there, it's perhaps perceived a bit that when you focus on self, that's selfish, because we're taught to sort of always look at the needs of others. And so some challenges there that I think I still resonate with, perhaps, is this idea of the notion of always giving and thinking about others' needs, but also balancing it with my needs, a personal need and self.
Which is a very interesting point that you have raised. And I do hope for those who are tuning in and is wanting to consider to do further research or further the education into postgraduate journey through master's or PhD, A very interesting topic would be looking at the commonalities and differences of self in a collective society, and how Pacific peoples navigate the space in between, um, jumping in between self and the collective. And I think there has been some research out there, but like with any research, needs to be updated and relooked at and resurfaced as well. We got a question here from Pākehā youth organization, who's working alongside a Pacific 17-year-old male who is training as a youth worker, and something that you're very familiar with. And he's doing his placement at this youth organization. Um, he has significant cultural and church responsibilities as his father is a pastor. Now, um, you know, do you have any tips or strategies on how the organization can support this young male to balance the cultural understanding of responsibilities with their study and placement requirements?
Um, I think it starts with some talanoa, and I think our parents, um, and this is not, I guess, a slamming on our parents, but I think often our parents think that the added responsibilities of various sort of things can all be done all at the same time. And that expectation is just a given that we do our best in all of these spheres of life. But I guess at a basic principle, there are only so many hours in the day. And I think, these conversations need to be had that if X amount of hours need to be committed to placement, then obviously the young man can't be in two places at one time. And I think also the conversation comes is that if you're not, um, if even in between the placements and then obviously other responsibilities, this idea of rest or well-being, it's not something that we do well as a community. We just cram in our schedule. But I guess um, this all starts with conversation, talanoa, and I think it's incredibly important to honor the role that the father plays as a minister, because that's incredibly honoring in the work and the service that they feel they're doing for, first and foremost, unto the Lord and God's work, but also unto the community and the parishioners that they have. And so I think having these conversations and just trying to support the young person and fulfilling these, because nonetheless he will want to make his parents proud. And I guess this is also this idea that the ministers' kids are definitely attached to the role of the minister, and they need to be there supporting their father's work.
Absolutely, and if I'd just like to add is that with it's a very it's a very encouraging and exciting space to be in. And I think to have courageous conversations with parents is critical for an organization who work alongside our Pacific young people to create their space and allow for a sense of understanding and commonality to in order to move forward. We have 5 more minutes left in our webinar. So for those who are tuning in, I know these are a lot of comments and questions flying in from all over the place across the Motu. There's in order to address the last question, there's a recommendation here from our one of our viewers. If you want to search up on Facebook or Google. There's a book out by Dr. Upolu and also Professor Unaisi Nambombamba, available from the University of South Pacific, that looks at the relationship between the self and the collective, relational hermeneutics, decolonizing mindset, and the Pacific Itulangi. So it's a book out there that can support our non-Pacific working alongside our Pacific communities. Sincere apologies if I can't go through all your questions, but I know for sure Sam will eventually respond back to you when he can. Let me ask this final question here. and it's quite timely because what we've seen in the media with a number of Pacific AUT law students at the Manukau or AUT South Campus who have not got any support regarding their studies. And there's a question here by Jono where he asks, what are your views regarding the responsibilities of tertiary institutions to create space for Moana or Pacific students to carry out their cultural responsibilities and remain engaged in tertiary study? Now, we've seen this within Dream Whanotanga and in the secondary school space. What do you see, Sam, that will support this kaupapa that we're doing within tertiary to support our Pacific, our Moana students or Pacific students coming into tertiary and wanting to achieve in tertiary, but also have the balance of carrying out their cultural and familial responsibilities?
Yeah, I think I guess a very blanket approach. And if I just hone in on South Auckland, there's a plethora of training providers and also universities setting up shop in South Auckland. And I think there comes this idea that if you want to set up shop in a space where there's a very youthful and growing population, which is very Māori and Pacific, therein lies the responsibility for you setting up shop as part of your business model to meet the needs of the area, be it socioeconomic needs and also cultural needs. And I think this business model of obviously an emerging market of South Auckland is in one sense underrepresented in higher education, so perhaps an area for growth. Therein lies the responsibility for institutions to come in and also work alongside those needs, but also present education, qualifications, and skills that are relevant to them as people, both in terms of their current needs, but also their future aspirations. And so I think education providers need to be flexible in what they deliver, need to hear the voices of communities, and then obviously do their best, their utmost best to change and to mold business processes, student support services, and everything else in curriculum to then reflect what is out there in the community, which from a South Auckland approach is very brown.
Awesome. I hope that answers your question. And because we are running out of time, Sam, I'd like to again thank you for accepting the invitation to come this morning on Zoom. Although it's supposed to be a face-to-face around a kava bowl, which is a very Pacific method of carrying out this Talanoa webinar. And unfortunately, as a result of the recent outbreak, it's appropriate that we carried this on the online platform. But I'll again thank you again for sharing your knowledge, your ideas, your experience and perception around a very I wouldn't say sensitive, but it's a very important topic that needs to be discussed often within our tertiary spaces. And and hence why I finished with that last question, in order to start to get our people thinking about it's almost cliche in the education space, but it's the famous title by Ad Milne where she says it's time that we start coloring in white spaces. Coloring in white spaces to ensure that our Māori Pacific students achieve, and not just achieve, but excel and become successful in everything that they do within the tertiary space. So thank you again, Sam Soalaupule, for sharing your insights and knowledge regarding your research that you're doing. Final question, where to from here for Asetoa, Sam Pilisi?
So yeah, still in education and blessed to be doing so and working with young people. Yeah, definitely considering some more research and furthering on from the previous research and just being creating research, one, that honors the stories of our people and the lived experiences, but also two, provides perhaps some insights to be useful back in our communities.
Awesome. Very exciting to hear, and I do wish you all the best for your journey and the next phase, which is a PhD. Again, for those who are tuning in, thank you again for your comments, your questions. We've had a significant number of people tuning in, and sincere apologies if I couldn't get to your questions. Again, we will get back to you as soon as possible. I will put up a link regarding Sam's thesis and research, and also a profile to support some of the work that you're doing. And again, for those who are tuning in to community research, we have an exciting panel webinar, Delano webinar, on the 1st of March, where we have invited Dr. Apo Aprosa to come in, and myself, and also Dr. Daniel Hernandez, to unpack and untangle the myths behind kava. And one of the questions that I'm putting forward to ensure that you get you excited is kava alcohol or just a general beverage? And so these are questions amongst many others that we will be unpacking in the 1st of March. But again, for this morning, thank you again, Sam, and may God continue to bless the work that you're doing in serving our community, serving our young people to excel in education. And if I can finish with these words by Benjamin Disraeli, he once said, "The greatest good that we can do for another is not to share your riches, but to reveal to them their own." And as specific educators, as specific community leaders, it is our job and responsibility that we unpack the hidden riches within our young Pacific peoples to grow up one day and be the change within the communities that we serve. With that, all the very best, everybody. Stay safe, stay home, and be kind. And we'll see you on the 1st of March. Kia ora.
Out.
The Community Research website offers a hub for good community research and researchers. It's the place for the public to find and share evidence about effective community practices. The website collects research and evidence and organizes these so that they can be easily accessed and used by other groups. You can access this research and browse by category, by a list of quick-link topics, or by searching for something specific. All of the research is free to download. The Community Research site is all about excellence and effective practices. You can view recordings of past webinars and find out about future ones. The webinars share evidence about what's working in the community sector. Published by Community Research in 2007, the Code of Practice provides the standards and guidelines for doing research. It's the place to start if you're thinking of undertaking research with or in a community or iwi. As well as the collection of research, we keep a register of experienced researchers who are skilled at working with iwi and communities. To find a researcher who can help you, we have a filter system which allows you to find people based on location, qualification, ethnic group, and area of expertise. The Community Research website is a unique resource for the community sector to use and share. It matters because communities who learn well will do well. It matters because it evidences what's working for us. For researchers and community people alike, we've made it as easy as possible to share your research on our website. Kaua e whakama. Uploading material is quick and simple. Save your work as a PDF and head over to Share Research. Answer a few questions that help us tag and organize the research so it's easy for people to find. If you're a researcher and skilled at working with communities, you can add your details to the directory of researchers so that you can be found. Community research keeps you updated and informed. This helps make you more effective. If you want to stay updated about the latest research, informed about new resources and our upcoming webinars, head over to sign up for our e-news on the homepage. Community research is a rich resource built for and by the community. For it to reach maximum potential, we rely on you to contribute, participate, and support the resource to grow and thrive. Mā te kotahitanga e ora ai tātou.